continue with abstraction with Andrianna Campbell, who is a doctoral candidate in art history at the CUNY Garrett Center in New York. She specializes in American art and art of the Americas in the modern and contemporary period. She has been the recipient of many prestigious fellowships, among which the Andrew W. Mellon Fellowship at the DIA Art Foundation last year. I suppose you're finishing this year. And she's now moving on to the American Philosophical Society Library. And she also has received a prestigious graduate teaching fellowship for the period where she was teaching between 2010 and 2013. Currently, Andrianna is a contributor to artform.com, and she also curated last year a show entitled Decenter, an exhibition on the centenary of the 1913 Armory Show, which explored the intersections of abstraction and digital mediations. She is now presenting a paper entitled Potential and Devastation in Norman Lewis's Abstract Expressionism.
It's really been a wonderful last 2 days. My paper is entitled One World or None, Potential and Devastation in Norman Lewis's Abstract Expressionism. Norman Lewis, as seen here, participated in abstract expressionist circles from 1946 to 1964. Notably, as early as 1946, Ad Reinhardt included him in his well-known cartoon, The How We Look at a Modern Art in America. Here, you can see Lewis's name clustered on the same branch as Jackson Pollock, Robert Motherwell, and Barnett Newman. And for a number of years, Lewis exhibited alongside those artists in group shows, as well as his colleagues, Dorothy Daner, David Smith, and Mark Tovey at the Willard Gallery. He was an attendee of the club, the informal meeting place for abstract expressionist artists, and a contributor to the 1950 artist sessions talks about the nature of this new abstraction. And by the 1970s, the Art Students League would hail him as one of the premier practitioners of this mid-20th century style. In 1972, an Art Students League biographer wrote an introduction for Lewis, the newest member of their faculty, labeling him as a distinguished abstract expressionist, who painted in a manner that Lewis had described as a visual poetry. Quoted in the introduction, Lewis detailed his painting strategy as a juxtaposition of negative space with smaller areas of color, allowing them to counteract. His earliest forays into this mode of working, an insistence on the interplay between the naked canvas and the painted portions, can be seen in his third solo exhibition at the Willard Gallery in 1951. There, Lewis devoted the exhibition to a body of work featuring softly smudged paint surfaces nestled next to the naked surface. Two of the paintings on view, Blending on the left and Every Atom Glows on your right, explicate his earliest flirtation with this mode of working. They were done at the beginning of a maturation of style, a moment that Robert Gunnell described as a departure from the more heavy abstractions of recent years, with a predilection for light and hazy approach. Scholarship on Lewis's mid-career work is still in its naissance. Nevertheless, the compelling title of Every Atom Glows has garnered the attention of scholars and led to Ann Gibson and others interpreting it as a manifestation of the cultural fears surrounding atomic policy in the post-World War II period. While this is certainly true, the public and literary reactions to the potential of atomic energy, as we've seen today, were often binary in nature. This nuclear dualism, or the potentiality of the atom, which held creative and destructive forces at the foundation of life and art, has been generally addressed in numerous works about abstract expressionism, but never in great detail regarding Lewis's work. It is a binary that Lewis posits with poetic and political references in the titles of his paintings, where he models a dualistic paradigm between form and content. This essay provides a more nuanced reading of nuclear dualism in relation to Lewis's paintings. It acknowledges the heterogeneous sources that inspired the artist, and therefore endow Lewis with artistic agency that is neither causal nor fully reductive. It would be a fallacy to read Lewis's paintings as representations of one theme from an image, say, the mushroom cloud of an atomic explosion. Rather, it is the fluctuating dualism in language and structure that concerns this essay. Lewis's work points to and operates within a mosaic network of interwoven dualisms of poetry and politics, allowing a constant unfolding process of rumination on an uncertain future. Dualistic language dominated the popular intellectual culture following the war. Not only do we find the phrase one world or none often used to describe the nuclear dualism addressed above, but it is also used to describe the burgeoning issues of race relations in the popular and intellectual culture. What were the matrices of interactions that allowed certain cultural anxieties to coalesce around one turn of phrase? Well, only 3 days after the bombing of Nagasaki in 1945, the journalist Edward Murrow stated in a radio broadcast, quote, "We're faced with a choice between a new world or none at all," end quote. Quickly integrated into the popular lexicon, One World or None was used as the title of a 1946 publication by the Federation of American Scientists, and was subsequently turned into a popular newsreel. The turn of phrase evolved out of fear for an atomic apocalypse. However, it would quickly be co-opted for use by civil rights activists. In her 1950 book on race relations, Ina Corrin Brown would say, quote, "Towards one world or none, and in the task of making one world, the problem of race relations plays a vital part, perhaps the most vital of all," end quote. The question, it seems, is, how can specific dualistic language undergird such seemingly disparate issues as atomic policy and race relations? This essay explores the anchoring of dualistic language within these two choices as a framework for understanding Lewis's interest in 1951. Assuredly, Lewis deliberately courted ambiguity in the title, "Every Atom Glows." It is certainly an abstraction where the resplendent floating forms imitate microscopic as well as macroscopic imagery. But are we supposed to assume that these tendrils are in actuality glowing atoms? In my review of scientific reproductions from the period, no one source illustration has been found. As Lewis's longtime partner Joan Murray noted in the catalog essay for the 1951 exhibition, Lewis's paintings function as a synthesis of the internal and external realities of space in, as she quotes, as I quote, "nature as it existed in myth," end quote. So the rich alternating blacks of the painting's surface function in a manner akin to the fluctuating meaning of the atom. The eye flickers between one area and the next, delighting in the contrast of the natural forms. Lewis's 1951 paintings feature structural dualism. His insistence on an interplay between illegible visual form and legible titles intensifies the tension of their abstraction. Throughout his career, Lewis titled his paintings based on recommendations from poets, books on Zen Buddhism, and in the case of the 1951 exhibition, with clear references to the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Scholars such as Matthew Bagel have long noted an Emersonian presence in abstract expressionism that is neither a source nor an influence. However, I argue the paintings in Lewis's 1951 exhibition reference Emerson concretely. For instance, Every Atom Glows is part of a much longer line. Self-kindled, every atom glows, and hints the future which it owes. By selecting an Emersonian title, Lewis is unambiguously referring back to the historic relationship of American culture to nature. In this case, the line for nature allows Lewis to dually reference American transcendentalism and current atomic policies. Of the 17 paintings Lewis exhibited, I propose he derived 12 titles from Emerson's writings. The most explicit references are in paintings such as Every Atom Glows, which you've seen, Newborn Millions, More Soft and Rain, and also Flames to Freeze, which can be seen here. Other titles allude to poetry or prose found across Emerson's compiled works. Based on the certainty of derivation of the 4 works I've listed above, The type of blending also then takes on a very suggestive meaning. And in Emerson's On Nature, he states, quote, "The blending of experience with the present, action of the mind, it is proper creation," end quote. Based on this reading, every atom glows and blending suggest a creative force rather than a destructive one. Every atom glows features the foundational properties of the atom, and blending, the abstract expressionist act of creating. To Lewis, creation could be seen as a blending of experience and action, born out of what he called, quote, "the expression of the artist's reaction to the world around him by visual symbols, and these symbols are untranslatable into verbal ones. It is my belief that the plan and purpose of the true creative artist is to work for a richer use of these symbols," end quote. Lewis believed the duty of the artist was to paint an art of his time by using symbols that could communicate these themes visually. How did these Emersonian references fit what Lewis saw as the creative obligation of the artist, and also within the broader framework of the abstract expressionist canon? Michael Leisha and others have demonstrated a resurgence of mysticism and transcendentalism in the 1940s. In fact, Lewis's position was not a matter of disinterested poetic reflection, but also an urgent response to his political and historical circumstances. A rejuvenation of vitalism and mysticism followed World War II, whereby two energist movements informed a revamped transcendentalism. Several scholars have noted a transcendental quality to abstract expressionism. For example, Anna Shave, writing about North Rocco, referred to a freedom from familiarity, generating transcendental experiences. Jackson Pollock had an interest in a synthesis of mysticism and transcendentalism, and Richard Posset-Dart also used transcendental symbolic forms. Lewis contributed to and was privy to this Emersonian interest in abstract expressionist circles. By 1951, he was firmly a member of this wider circle of abstract expressionist practitioners, and was also cognizant of the implied transcendental rhetoric within those circles. The 1950s were also important years for a resurgence of interest in Emerson. Marking the centennial of his most influential writings, a flurry of secondary literature, as well as reprints of Nature, essays, first and second series, poems, and the conduct of life, followed World War II. As Len Beaujean has written, a search for national identity and cohesion in relation to nature contributed to the popularity of these works. Lewis's explicit reference to Emerson should be noted as part of a larger cultural phenomenon, which permeated a wide range of artistic and cultural circles. Scholars have tried to draw connections, and this is Barbara Novak very explicitly, between American landscape painting and abstract expressionism. Yet to accept Every Atom Glows as exclusively a continuation of an American naturalistic and landscape tradition is surely myopic, and the continuation and the other side of a false alternative. Emerson's popularity after World War II should not be viewed as a continuation of American naturalism, mainly because mid-20th century connotations diverged vastly from those of the mid-19th century. In the 1950s, popular publications often features Emersonian references, which echoed the dualism that we find in language around atomic policy. Nowhere is this more apparent than the writings of urban historians such as Lewis Mumford, who conveyed and filtered Emerson's theories to the general public. As early as 1926, Mumford's essay, The Morning Star, Emerson, noted Emerson's embrace of, quote, both science and myth, an affirmation which justified the existence of the artist, end quote. According to Mumford, artists had a responsibility to society to use their creative forces for cultural renewal. The interconnectedness of science and myth were seen in numerous cultural formats. And as Jeffrey Weiss has noted, there is a symmetrical relationship between science and myth in the work of other abstract expressionist painters, most notably Barnett Newman. Lewis's understanding of Emerson would have been predicated on integration of the scientific and the mythic as a basis for the creative act. Every Atom Glows seemingly indulges the easy dualism between poetry and science, which is well-worn territory today, but in the 1950s was an accepted means of defining the goals of art. On April 16, 1951, at Reinhardt sent 3 postcards to Catherine Scribner, an acquaintance in Washington, D.C. One postcard lists undesirable words to use to describe art, as opposed to more suitable words. And on the other postcard, Reinhardt wrote a variety of dualisms, such as country and city, space and time, subject and object, and the poetic and the scientific. As Liza Corinne notes, these dualisms were not meant as oppositions, but were understood as coexisting harmoniously, while you have one reflecting and therefore transforming the other. With or without Lewis's awareness of Mumford, the pervasiveness of literature describing a dialectic of a mythic universalism conjoined to a scientific vibration abounds. However, it is likely that they did know each other, and Lewis most likely read his writings. As early as 1936, Mumford sent a note to Lewis's gallerist, Marion Willard, congratulating her on the opening of her gallery, and stating his intention to visit her new space. Mumford also was a frequent visitor to the ACA Gallery during World War II, where Lewis also exhibited. During the Christmas of 1951, Marion Willard gave a copy of The Conduct of Life to Joan Murray, Lewis's partner. Initially, the importance of Emerson to Mumford is really his support of technology within the natural environment. However, Mumford's overwhelmingly positive appreciation of science really shifted after World War II. And even with this shift, he still titles his 1951 volume, The Conduct of Life, with a direct reference to Emerson's own publication, as you can see here. Mumford's continued affiliation to Emerson derives from his admiration of Emerson's dialectical method, which he described as the joining of apparent opposites in order to achieve a cultural renewal. As he mentions in 1951 letter to Frank Lloyd Wright, the devastation of losing his teenage son during World War II makes Mumford position The Conduct of Life as an attempt to reconcile the grave crisis of the world within the state of society in the post-war period. He states, and I quote, "There is a chapter on love in that book as the only force capable of saving our loveless and death-seeking civilization," end quote. Mumford questioned the harmony of scientific progress because it coincided with what he saw as, quote, "the strange internal contradictions," end quote, of the atomic age. Every atom glows operates within this dualistic imaginary, and such contradictions were at play in the intersections of science and poetry in the period, but also in the dualistic language surrounding race relations. Lewis's lyrical, hazy palette, his use of a subtle range of grays, can be seen in blending, which Gunnow referred to in his Art News Review from 1951 as a kind of abstract cathedral. Gunnow, the reference is understandable. Out of the foggy ascendant grays, Lewis has painted sharp black horizontal lines that imply architecture and might allude to what Murray had called the combination of the internal and external reality of the city block. After all, in the city block one finds a mix of people, swarming in crowds and blending into the invisible, horizontal, and relational city. Furthermore, the creative force of blending, as the Emersonian title implies, would realize Lewis's transformative desires within the structural format of his painting without literal representations of race. Politically, Lewis was progressive. During his time with the Federal Art Project, he was one of several African-American artists who aligned with the anti-racist left. In the mid-1940s, he taught at the George Washington Carver School. You can see this in an exhibition pamphlet from the school. And by the 1940s, he began teaching at the Jefferson School for Social Science. There, faculty members such as Charles White, Elizabeth Catlett, and Gwendolyn Bennett befriended Dashiell Hammett and other members of the anti-racist causes. Joining the Civil Rights Congress, or the CRC, Lewis would have been surrounded by friends and colleagues such as Hammett, Max Weber, Dorothy Parker, and Catlett. Catlett, like most of the artists teaching at the school, practiced a social realistic style, which conveyed her politics. Her print, Civil Rights Congress, from 1949, shows the allegorical figure of the CRC pulling back the hands of death from a seated child. Working in Mexico with the Taller de Gráfica Popular, Catlett produced the kind of artwork that the left lauded. However, Lewis, working in the abstract mode, did not. Every Atom Glows was painted during a stressful period in both Lewis's political and artistic life. As a member of the CRC, which is considered a Communist Front organization, Lewis was investigated by the House Un-American Activities Committee. His colleague Campbell would go to jail for refusing to provide the names of CRC members, among them Lewis. Moreover, as his work transitioned to an abstract mode, Lewis's colleagues, with the exception of Reinhardt, did not accept his new style. His critical reception in political circles attracted a few negative reviews. Charles Corwin, writing for the Daily Worker in 1949, states, quote, "By restricting himself to formal play, Lewis has cut himself off from the richness of life which surrounds him," end quote. And in a 1950 review, Corwin compares Lewis to Charles White, describing him as a young Negro artist with ties to the Jefferson School. However, he noted that Lewis's work was modest in comparison to White's epic aspirations and social directions. By 1950, Lewis had stopped teaching at the Jefferson School, believing that the emphasis on social realism really hampered his creativity. Blending and Every Atom Glows were created in the aftermath of a decision to divorce his political activities from his art. In Blending and Every Atom Glows, politics are not represented, but the paintings still engage in this dualistic play between the politic and the poetic. Reviewing the exhibition for the New York Times, Howard DeVries praises Lewis's use of white space to play an important role, and calls him a lyric chronicler of the twilight world and of a place where images are veiled, but unquestionably and poetically real. In both of these flickering, modulated gray works, the twilight world is a place that dualistically mirrors the constructive and destructive language of the period. As such, they echo the consistent dichotomous use of the phrase "one world or none," which would have interested Lewis as the numerous works on race relations in his library texts. As Nora Lillian Sullivan notes in her 1947 dissertation, "Amity or Annihilation: How Teachers Can Promote World Unity Through Intercultural Education," the consistent battle for racial equality was seen as central to the problems of the atomic age. One World or None presents the future as two possible outcomes, and Lewis's use of dualistic language for Blending and Every Atom Glows engaged in this model concerned with oppositions, the wavering between atomic poetics and politics, and therefore this the intertwinedness of both. Joe Murray aptly summarizes Lewis's approach, whereby colors and lines merge to produce essences of moods, places, fantasies, and fears, the gloom over the city, perhaps, or a chill black and white winter, but transcending the particular with the unity and simplicity that make a private experience communicable, end quote. The politics of these paintings rests in their modeling of Lewis's desire for a Mumfordian cultural renewal in the lived environment. A 1956 photograph from the St. Louis Dispatch shows Marion Willard surrounded by a handful of her artists. Lewis and Charles Salinger are included. It recalls Willard's early grouping of Salinger, Smith, and Lewis in a 1951 drawing show. Lewis's colleagues at Willard were all addressing issues of nuclear dualism in the landscape in their exhibitions between the end of the war and 1951. The checklist from William Sykes' 51 show explicitly references World War II with titles such as The Massing in the Fog, Soul Shadows, Unfathomed Passage, and Holocaust. This is not surprising because a number of abstract expressionists practice an integration of external space into their pictorial space. The most iconic example of this being Jackson Pollock's 1948 exhibition at Betty Parsons Gallery. As Michael Asia has so convincingly argued, Pollock depicted external spatial effects in paintings such as reflection of the Big Dipper, comet, shooting star, phosphorescence, water paths, and enchanted forests. These external spatial effects allude to a search for place following World War II and the comfort of dualistic language in an uncertain world. Critics, in turn, restated the language of the cosmos, the vortex, or the web to accentuate the eternal turmoil of psyche and spatial entrapment. However, Lewis's position as an abstract expressionist is often precarious because of similar internal and external illusions in his paintings. The extent and avant-gardism of his abstraction are often questioned, and rather than engaging in what is now really a circular argument about how much of an abstract painter he was, this paper contextualizes Lewis among his peers while questioning the abstract expressionist canon. Flames to Freeze, Blending, Every Atom Glows also suggests the blending of internal and external concerns in the 1950s. The potential of the atom, which had been a fascination earlier in the century, had soured in the post-war period, as artists and the public at large began to imagine a world of unlimited possibility or dystopic wasteland. As the rest of Emerson's line makes clear, every atom glows hints at a future that's just out of reach. The coming anxiety of the 1960s with regard to time had been presaged much earlier in the 1950s. Lewis's paintings of twilight, of the moment either before creation or after destruction, navigate the apprehensions of the public in the years following World War II. Thank you.